All right, so I'm going to get started now. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Study Skills Workshop. Hopefully you can hear me okay and you can see my slides, but I'm just going to get started. So thank you so much for coming. And yes, so my name is Amanda. I'm one of the advisors at ACE Acumen, and today I'm going to be talking to you about study tips and tricks that you can use for your upcoming final exams. All right, so to start off, just a quick agenda. So I'm going to break this study skills workshop up into 3 parts. So we're going to talk about before the test, what you should do, during the test, some test taking strategies, and then what you should be doing after the test to prepare for the next time. So just some workshop expectations before we get started. Just be respectful to yourself and your classmates. If you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Please make sure that the questions are relevant to the material. Also, if you could stay muted unless you do have a question, just so we don't get any feedback, and then ask questions and participate as well. Okay, so I am going to do a quick poll. If you'd like to type in the chat, that is completely fine. If you'd like to answer, that's also fine. So take a moment to think about how you feel about your study skills and where you are right now. So do you feel confident about your study skills? Do you feel not so confident? Do you feel okay about your skills? Start to think about where you can improve and where there's some room for growth. Also think about where maybe you need the most improvement. So is it the test taking strategies that you need help with? Is it time management? Is it planning your calendar? All of these things are really important to consider when we do talk about study skills, and it's important to know where you have to improve. So just take a moment to reflect. If you do want to type anything in the chat, that is also welcome. And wherever you are with your studying, that's okay as well, because we're going to go through all the strategies that you need. All right, so part 1, before the test. So in this section, we're going to talk about everything from being in class until the actual day of your test and what you should be doing to prepare. So to start off, it's really important that you start early, and you can actually set yourself up for a great test by starting in your classes. So when you're in your classes, it's really important to be taking good notes and to be actively paying attention. So when you are taking your notes, it's really important to be able to organize them effectively. So you want to be using clear headlines that summarize the topic. So you can use a clear title, you can include a date. All of these things are just going to organize your notes so that you actually know what you're looking at when you go back when you're studying for the test. So use clear headlines that summarize the topic. If your instructor is using a PowerPoint, you can take the title from each slide as your headlines, and then you can also try to write what's on the slides, but also pay attention to what your instructor is saying. So your instructor might be including some really important information that's not on the slides that they're presenting. So you might want to include things like explanations or examples that you wouldn't be getting from the slides. It's also really important to try to pay attention for certain signals that indicate that it is important what they're talking about. So things like hand gestures, or maybe they stop and write something on the board, or maybe they change their voice. All of these things are really important to consider when making your notes and are perhaps something that you could be jotting down. And then also, when you are sitting in class, it's really important to not just be passively listening, passively taking notes, but actually applying your knowledge. So when you are in class, you can apply your knowledge by thinking about examples in your real life of where you've seen the concepts, maybe linking different class concepts together, maybe thinking about certain examples or questions that could come up on your test. All of these active listening strategies and active learning strategies are going to be really important for when you are studying, because it helps to improve your memorization of the concepts and also deepen your understanding. So when you're making your notes, make sure to keep them organized, include what the instructor is saying as well as what's on the slides, and then also make sure to actively listen and engage with your classes. Okay, so one example of note-taking that has been proven to lead to success is something called Cornell Notetaking. So this was a style of note-taking that was created by Cornell University. And this is a way of organizing your notes that has been proven to lead to success. So as you can see, they're broken up into 4 different parts. So we have the title, some keywords or cue columns on the left-hand side. Then we have the notes column, and we also have a summary table at the bottom. So the title is going to be the main idea of the lecture that day. You might want to include things like the date as well, maybe the chapter that you're in. All of these things, again, are really important for organizing your notes later on. Then in the Q column on the left-hand side, you are going to include your headings. So we talked about making organized headings before. This is where you can include those. You can also include the most important information, things like key terms, perhaps, broad topics, maybe possible test questions. All of that is going to go in the Q column on the left-hand side. Then on the right-hand side in the notes column, you are going to put all of the bulk of the information. So this is going to be the definition to those key terms. You're going to put what your instructor is saying, the explanation, some examples, all of that kind of stuff that correspond to those headings that you put on the left-hand side. Then at the bottom, we have a summary. So it's really important to try to be able to explain what you just learned. Again, this is a really important part of active learning. And so you can do that at the bottom with the summary as well, and just briefly go over the information that you learned. Later on, which we will talk about, you can turn these notes into your study notes, and it just makes studying a lot easier, and it helps you with time management as well, because you're making both your class notes and your study notes. All right. Also, what you might want to do to increase the active learning portion of your classes is including graphics in your notes. So even if your instructor doesn't include graphics, this might be something that you want to add in as supplemental information for you to be able to look back upon when it does come to studying. So there are different types of graphics that you can include. Here we see a Venn diagram, a label diagram, and a timeline. So the Venn diagram is great for compare and contrast. Label diagram is really great if you need to know the parts of something. And then a timeline is great if you want to see the evolution of something as well. Also, a little tip that you can use is when it does come time to study, you can black out the key terms and try to fill in the graphics yourself. So this is a really great tool to use to boost that active learning portion of your studying. And then the other example that we have with graphics is including a mind map. So a mind map is where you link all of the concepts together that you've learned about. So in the middle might be the chapter, for example, or even if you want to try to do this with the whole term, you can do that as well. So it might be the course name. And then branching out, you're going to go from more broad to more specific items, showing how they all link together. Again, this is a really great way to try to include active learning in your studying, and it might be really helpful if you want to see how different areas that you learned about link together. So this is something that you can also include as well. And again, you can do these graphics as a way to deepen your active learning, even if your instructor isn't putting those in their notes themselves. All right, so now we're going to talk about leaving from your class, what you should do in between your class time and the test. So sometimes what happens is we go into our class, we take really, really great notes, we're actively listening, we understand the material, and then we never look at it again until it's time to study. So what this actually leads to is us forgetting the bulk of the information that we just spent so much time trying to understand in our class. So here you can see an example of this with the forgetting curve. So if we start at 100% retention, let's say that's us learning the material in class, and then if we look down at the end of the graph, we are below 20% retention when it comes time to actually take the midterm. So if you do this and you don't revisit your material, when you actually get to the exam, you're going to have a lot more information to study, and it's going to be a lot harder for you to try to squeeze all that in. There is a way to combat this, though. So the forgetting curve can be combated by regular review of the material. So let's say you learn everything in your class. You're using your active listening strategies. You're really trying to understand the topic. You're making great notes. Then maybe a week later, you can go back to your notes and try to write a summary, that summary section that we were talking about in the Cornell notes. Try to see if you can summarize the notes that you took. You can think back, remember when you were learning it in class, and see if you can write a really great summary. Then maybe some more time goes by, maybe a couple weeks later, you decide that you want to revisit those notes and put in some graphics. Maybe you want to make a mind map of the notes that you took. Maybe you want to make a Venn diagram, for example, and compare and contrast some of those items that we talked about. Again, we are revisiting the material, and so your understanding and your remembering is going to go back up to 100% retention. Then by the time it actually comes to study for the test, you're not going to have as much material to study because you remember a lot of it. So that studying isn't going to be as hard for you, and you're going to know what you don't know. You're going to know what you need to focus on. And so that way you can be more prepared for the test. Also, it's really important to do this to catch yourself if you aren't understanding anything, and book some proactive tutoring sessions, perhaps talk to your instructor, talk to your peers, all of those things you can do before it's too late and it's a couple days before the test. So reviewing the information is really important, not only just for your remembering, but also for your understanding and catching yourself if you do need some extra support. All right. So we talked about making notes, we talked about reviewing the material over the semester, but how do you actually know when to start studying? So hopefully if you revisited the material over the semester, you have a good grasp on what you're comfortable with and what you maybe need more time to work on. So use your previous knowledge. Was there an area where you found it a little bit trickier to work on? Also think about back to previous tests that you did. So was there a test that you did really, really well on? How long did you study for that? Was there a test that you didn't do so well on? How long did you study for that? You can use your previous knowledge and your personal experience to start to plan out your study calendar. It's also really important to know what works for you. So maybe you need a little bit longer to study than some of your peers in your class, or maybe you don't need as long. This is why it's really important to reflect upon your previous experience to find what works for you personally. So you can use both a term calendar and a daily schedule. So when you're looking at your syllabus that you get at the beginning of the semester, you can take all those dates and put them on a term calendar. These are just going to be broad deadlines. Maybe you include the course that you're in and when something's due. You can also put on this term calendar when you want to start studying for a course as well. That might be really helpful to keep you organized. But the term calendar is going to be a really broad overview of everything that you have to do. And that way, when you're looking in your future, you can see, okay, this week is really busy, so I'm going to allow myself time to study a couple weeks before that. So using a term calendar is a great way to organize the material. Also, using a daily schedule is when you can start to break up those big, large, kind of broad tasks into smaller parts and get very specific with what you want to study. So maybe you start using a weekly calendar and you break up your studying by the hour, or a daily to-do list as well, where you can note the priorities of things that you want to get done. And again, you're going to use your term calendar in order to plan your daily calendar or your weekly schedule effectively. Also, it's really important to add SMART goals to your calendar. So we're going to take a moment to talk about SMART goals now. But instead of just writing, I want to study my networking 101 class, that's pretty broad and it doesn't really give you a good idea of exactly what you're going to accomplish within that time. So adding SMART goals allows you to be more specific and get more things done. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So here's an example of to-do lists and weekly schedules. Again, you can see how detailed these schedules are. So we have the priorities, the due dates, what we're doing, maybe who is your instructor, where you are, and then when it is done. Also, your weekly schedule you can see is broken up by the hour, so you can include things like your extracurricular activities, your work schedule, and your class schedule as well to see when you actually have free time to be able to study. So this is really helpful for you to do to break down your goals into more detailed goals. All right, so now we're going to talk about SMART goals in a little bit more detail. So let's say you have a test coming up for your computer class, and you decide that on Wednesday you will study Microsoft Word. So again, this is a pretty broad goal. How would you make this into a SMART goal? So if anybody has any ideas, you can put it in the chat. But to start, let's see how we can make this goal more specific. So any ideas you can put in the chat of how we can take something really broad like Microsoft Word and make it a little bit more specific so we know exactly what we're studying. So one way that we can make this more specific is by looking at a particular area of Microsoft Word. So maybe we just want to study making a table, for example. Also, how are we going to make this goal measurable? Just saying you will study Microsoft Word, well, how do you know when you're going to be done studying? By making a goal measurable, you're able to assess your progress and then decide whether or not you can move on. You need to make sure that your goals are achievable. So you don't want to be cramming the night before. You want to make sure that you allot yourself enough time to actually get the work done. And again, this is why it's really important to review the material over the semester, because you'll know if you understand something and you can actually study it on your own, or if you do need to go to tutoring, let's say, to get a little bit of extra help. Relevant, so making sure that we are studying what is actually relevant to the course, and also what is actually relevant to us personally. So maybe we have a really, really good grasp on how to make charts on Microsoft Word, but we don't know how to make tables. So we'd want to spend more time on tables because that's going to be more relevant to us. And then also time bound. So we want to make sure that we're tailoring this goal to a specific time that we know that we can work on this. So if we look at this example in a little bit more detail. So let's say on Wednesday, you want to study for Microsoft Word. To make this more specific, you will study how to make a table on Microsoft Word. So we're taking this big concept and we're breaking it down into a smaller part. You will be able to fill in a diagram without looking at the answers. So that's how you can measure whether or not you actually know this concept, and if you can move on, or maybe if you need to spend a little bit more time studying on it. So achievable, you know that you will give yourself enough time to complete the task. You know that you have a basic understanding of the task to be able to study it on your own. Relevant, so your test does have a section specifically on how to make a table, but maybe not on how to make a chart. So you're not going to study how to make a chart. You're just going to study how to make a table. And then time bound. So in order to keep on track with your studying, you decide that you will need to finish this on Wednesday. Maybe you will spend 1 hour learning the material and 20 minutes or so testing yourself to see if you actually know it. So here we have this kind of broad goal and we made it more specific. And now we know exactly what we're doing so that when it comes time to study, our studying is going to be really direct. Okay, so we made our class notes, we made our calendar, we've been reviewing over the semester, and now it comes time to actually make our study notes and sit down and study. So how are we going to make these notes and how are we going to study effectively so that we're not wasting our time? So I'm going to talk about recall versus recognition quite a bit. So recall is when you don't have the answers in front of you when you're asking yourself a question. So you have to recall the information because you're not going to be able to see the answers. Recognition, on the other hand, is when you have a question and you can see some options of the answers that you want to choose. So a recall example on a test would be maybe fill in the blank with no word bank. So you have to use your prior knowledge and pull that up in order to answer the question. Recognition, on the other hand, might be something like a multiple choice test. You can see all the answers and the options that you have, and you know that one of those will be correct, so you can recognize that term and fill it in. When it comes to studying before your test, you want to make sure that you are studying in a recall method. So this way, when it does come to your test, you know that even if there are recognition questions, you're going to be able to answer them easily because you studied in a harder way. And if there are recall questions, well, great, you already prepared for that. So making sure that your study practices include recall questions where you put your notes away and you're trying to actively recall the terms or the information that you need to know. Also, again, why it's really important to kind of review over the semester is to know what you don't know. So it's really easy to kind of get into a pattern where you're just reviewing the information that you already have a good grasp on because it feels really good, right? So if you know something, it's going to boost your confidence to go over it again. This, however, is not the most effective way to study because when it comes to the test, if you're asked a question that you don't know, you want to be able to fill that in rather than having spent all your time studying on stuff that you already know the information for. So making sure that we know what we don't know and going over that until we do know it. Also, the next point is called the Feynman technique. So if you can't explain something simply, then perhaps you don't know it well enough. So if we go back to those Cornell notes that we were talking about earlier, that summary section at the bottom is going to be a really good way to test this. So can we fill in that summary section without looking at the notes, and can we explain it in a very simple way? Perhaps maybe try explaining it out loud and imagine that you have to teach it to someone that doesn't know. Are you able to do that? Are you able to do that without looking at your notes? And are you able to organize your thoughts in a succinct way? Also, practice applying your knowledge. So again, this is going back to that active learning portion, making sure that you are able to expand on your knowledge rather than just memorizing and reciting back. So can you think of examples? Can you think of where this has been seen in your life? Or maybe can you think about how this would connect your courses together? So again, talking about recall versus recognition. So if we look on the right-hand side, what is the capital of Canada? The top question is going to be a recall question. So we don't have any answers in front of us, and so we have to think back through all of our knowledge and pull out the correct answer. On the other hand, the multiple choice question at the bottom of the right-hand side is going to be more of a recognition question. So we can go through the answers and we can see what feels familiar to us and pick that. So when you're studying, you want to base your practice questions off of the top one, making sure that you use those recall strategies. Also, again, going back to the Cornell notes, these are really great because these can transform into your study notes. So if you actually fold this paper in half and you separate the Q column and the notes column, so the Q column will be on one side, the notes column will be on the other side, you can ask yourself the Q column questions. So maybe you have a key term on that side. You can look at that key term, you can recite the definition without looking at it, and then you can flip the page over and see if you got it right. This is a really great way that your class notes can just be transformed into your study notes, and you'll be saving more time in the long run. So this might be something that you want to try out. Also, as mentioned before, you can leave the summary section blank and then go back and try to summarize your notes to see if you do know it and can explain it simply. And then again, so applying your knowledge. So what we have here is something called Bloom's taxonomy. This is a way of organizing information. So at the very bottom, we have kind of the most basic understanding of a concept. And then as we work our way up the pyramid, at the top, we have the most detailed way of looking at a concept. So your test is most likely going to focus on the bottom three portions of the pyramid. So you want to make sure that you're asking yourself questions that rely on using, remembering, understanding, and applying. So that when it does come time to the test, even if you are asked a really hard application question, you've already practiced this and you know how to think outside the box. So at the very bottom, the most basic understanding of a concept, technically you don't even need to understand it, is just remembering. So here we are just reciting what we've memorized. We have no understanding of the concept. Maybe we'll be able to answer the most basic questions on a test, but that's kind of going to be it. So in order to avoid that and make sure that we cover all our bases, we want to move up the pyramid. So the next level is going to be understanding. So do you actually understand the concepts? Are you going past just memorization? Are you able to break them down, maybe practice saying it to someone who might not understand. See if you can teach it to someone. That's going to be a deeper understanding of the content and prepare you more than just memorizing terms. Then lastly, we have apply. So again, I've been talking about active learning. This is where that's really going to come into key. So can you apply the material? If your instructor gives you an application question, can you answer that? So again, looking through in class, we are expanding our knowledge. We're going back on our notes, thinking of examples. How can we link these concepts together? All of that is going to prepare us for those harder application questions. And again, this is Bloom's taxonomy, and it's really important to ensure that you're using multiple levels of the pyramid when you are studying. All right, and then practice. So again, recall versus recognition. We actually want to get that recall piece in. So can we practice with practice tests so that when it comes time for the actual test, we have a pretty good idea of how we're going to do on it. So something that you can do if you aren't given a practice test by your instructor is you can look in your textbook. A lot of times textbooks will have practice questions for you. Also, you can make your own. So I used to do this all the time. I would make my own practice tests. This is another really great way of applying the information because you do have to think outside the box of how you can make questions on the material. And then that way also too, you're able to kind of change the level of difficulty. So maybe you start off with that bottom level of the pyramid and then you can work your way up and see how you do on each practice test. Also, if you're someone that gets a little bit nervous with the time constraints of the test, you can try practice timed writing. So you can set a timer, you can set a number of questions and see if you can answer them within the time. If you are someone that does struggle with the time piece of tests, the 20-10 rule might be something that you want to try out. So 20 seconds to understand the question and 10 seconds to answer. You can try this during your practice tests, and then if this doesn't work for you, you can adapt and change it to what works for you. That's the great thing about practice tests is it gives you an opportunity to try what works for you. And then again, repeat what you got wrong. So it's really important to know what you don't know. Practice tests are a great way to figure that out. And what you do get wrong, you can repeat until you get them right. And then again, recall versus recognition, ensuring that those practice tests are truly recall so that when you get to the test, you're going to have an easier time than you did when you were practicing. Okay. So there are apps that you can use to study. If you are someone that likes to use technology when you are studying, there are a few different apps that you can use. This is something that I liked to do because I thought it was very convenient. You could kind of take it with you if it was on your phone, and then you can kind of study wherever you are. So the first thing that you can do is Quizlet. This is a great app. There are some recognition questions, but you can filter them out to just be recall. Maybe if you want to start off easier, you can start learning the material with recognition and then move on to recall. But this is a really helpful tool. Also, something else that's really helpful is Chegg flashcards. So you can put maybe a term on one side, the definition on the other, and then you can ask yourself questions and you've made your own practice test. Also, if you're not into using apps, you can just use regular good old-fashioned cue cards as well. So you can put a question on one side and answer on the other. You ask yourself the question, you answer, and then you flip it over to see if you got it right. Then you can separate out what you got right and what you got wrong and just go over the ones that you got wrong. Again, this is why it's important to start early so you can practice what works for you and adapt your studying as you go along. Okay, so you made your notes in class, you've gone over the material throughout the semester, you planned out your study calendar, you made your study notes, and now you're sitting down to actually study and learn the information. So how are you going to break up your hour? Again, it's important to know what works for you, but one thing that you might want to try out is something called the power hour. So you're going to start by setting your goal. Again, think about your SMART goal. So what are you going to learn? How are you going to tell if you've actually learned it or not? And then is focus time. So what's really important to notice here is that it says no distractions. So put away your phone, really just spend time focusing on the material and just carve out those 40 to 45 minutes to give all of your energy to studying. What might be a good tip is to actually set a timer on your phone so that you don't have to keep on checking the clock. Make sure that your phone is on vibrant, maybe put it in another room. That way you can really just dedicate yourself to studying. Then after you do that, it's important to also take breaks as well. Give yourself a minute to digest the material that you just learned. Maybe you can take a look at your phone during this 5 to 10 minutes of break that you have. And then the review. So what did you just learn? Again, you can go over your practice test here, see if you need to go over the material or if you're okay and you can move on. So this is a really great way of breaking up your hour. And again, it's important to find what works for you. All right, so now we're at the night before. So the night before, you should be done all of your hard studying work. It's really important that you start early again so that you're not cramming and you don't have to pull an all-nighter. Sleep is extremely important to learning new information. Your memories actually get moved from short-term to long-term memory when you do sleep. They've done multiple studies where they had students who slept and students who didn't sleep. The students that slept did remarkably better on their tests. It's really, really important that you get a good night's sleep the night before and that you're in a good state to write your test. Again, why it's really important to start early. Also set your alarm early. Make sure that you have enough time to wake up, that you're not groggy before you write the test, that you've maybe had some positive thoughts, that you've had a good breakfast. If you do want to go over your notes, hopefully all your hardcore studying will be done so you can just kind of read over your notes, reflect on them. And also a tip that you might want to use if you're someone that gets test anxiety is to write down what you're nervous about. So they did a study where one group of students wrote down everything that they were nervous about before they went into a test, and the other group of students didn't do that. They just went to write the test. The group of students that wrote down what they were nervous about not only felt less anxious about their test, but they also performed better as well. So if you are someone that does struggle with test anxiety and you get really nervous, maybe try writing down what you were nervous about and see if that helps you. Again, you can do this in your practice tests as well, just to see what works for you. Okay, so that was part one, everything that you should do kind of leading up to your test. Now it's time to take the test. Hopefully you feel really good about your studying. And now we're gonna go over some test taking strategies that you can use to answer the test to the best of your ability. Again, hopefully the bulk of your studying is done and you feel confident, you did well on your practice tests, and you kind of know how you're gonna do before going into this. Okay, so what is really important when taking a test is reading the question. I know it might sound really simple, like of course you have to read the question, but it's really important to look at specifically what you are being asked. So don't get distracted by extra information. Sometimes instructors will throw in some extra information to try to trick you. And it's really important that you kind of look at the base of what you're being asked and what is actually important to answer the question. Also, how is the question phrased? So pay attention to those terms like incorrect versus correct. Also, not, right? So which of the following are not blank? If you miss that not, you're going to get the question wrong on a question that you could have gotten right if you just maybe spent an extra couple seconds reading the question. Also pay attention to what looks familiar to you. So do you see any key terms in there? Do you see any definitions? Do you see any important pieces of information that you've recognized before that you can use to answer the question? Also, another tip that you might want to use is bringing a highlighter or a pen. That way you can highlight the key terms, circle important information, and make sure that you're getting what the question is specifically asking you so that you can answer it correctly and you're not making silly mistakes. So for example, if we look at reading the question, if we look at the first example, so what is the only food that has no expiration date? So if we're reading over this, we can pay attention to key terms that will help us better understand the answer and help us to rule out some of the options. So the first word that we can look at is food. So that's a key term. We can highlight that. And then if we go to the options, we already see we have water there that we can cross out. That's not food. So there, we've already eliminated one of the options. Also really important is no. So we're not looking for a food that has an expiration date. That will help us to rule out other answers. And that way we have less options to choose from just by reading the question carefully. If we look at the next point as well, what is the nearest planet to the sun? Again, we can look at the phrasing. So we're looking at nearest as well as planet. So planet may be another key term. We know that the moon is not a planet, so we can cross that out right away. Again, we're eliminating options, and that's just from reading the question, right? We're not even looking at the answers yet. We're just reading the question, and we can already rule out some of the options. So then you've read the question, you understand it, and now choosing your answer. So if we're specifically talking about multiple choice questions here, maybe try thinking of your answer before you look at the options. So again, using those recall strategies that hopefully you've been practicing in your practice tests. This way you can go through the options and select the one that you thought of, and you don't have to get confused by some of the other terms that maybe aren't the right answer. Also beware of conditional answers. So if you see an answer and you're thinking, okay, this would be true if X, Y, and Z were correct. If X, Y, and Z aren't listed in the question, maybe you're working a little bit too hard to try to fit that answer in. You shouldn't have to work hard to make your answer correct, specifically if that stuff that you're thinking about isn't listed in the question. You want to choose the most correct answer. Again, boil it down as well if it's multiple choice. We were doing that on the previous example, so crossing out the terms or the answers that you know right away are wrong. And then that way, if you do have to guess, you can make a guess with less options, and you are increasing your chances of getting it right. Also, if all else fails, it's okay to guess as well if you don't know the answer. Now, if you're writing on your answer, on the other hand, again, it's really important to read the question carefully. You can also underline, highlight key terms that you see. Also, something that you might want to pay attention to is if your instructor includes how many marks the question is worth. You can use this marking system to guide your answer. So let's say you have a short answer question and your instructor notes that it's worth 5 marks. That might be an indicator that you need 5 pieces of information to write down. So using those marks as a way to guide your question. You can also try brainstorming as well. So if you're someone that kind of gets concerned about how to write the answer and you're thinking about all the other stuff that's not the key pieces of information that you need, you can brainstorm before. So let's say you list out those 5 items that you need. That way you have what you need, and then you can worry about writing the question and not get distracted by that. Also, it's really important when you are writing your answer to just use the necessary information. So sometimes what happens is something called the everything but the kitchen sink approach. So we get a short answer question and we think, okay, I have all this knowledge, all this information. I'm going to show my instructor that I know everything in this course. And we write down all of this information that is not relevant to the question. So while that might sound like a good idea, you're actually detracting from your answer. You want to make sure that your answer is concise, to the point, that you're just including the information that your instructor asks for, because your instructor isn't going to mark down the other information as correct. They are just looking for a very specific answer. So don't waste your time throwing everything that you know into a question. All right, again, managing time restrictions. So we talked about this a little bit in the previous section about practicing with time constraints. But if you are in a test situation and you do find that you get nervous by the time, it might be helpful to answer what you know first. So go through your test, answer what you know first. This is going to build your confidence up. Also, if worse comes to worse and you don't finish on time, you know that you're getting the marks for what you know versus spending more time on the information that you might not get correct. Also, answer every question. Even if this means at the last possible second, you're just circling random answers, as long as you answer every question, maybe some of those answers are going to be correct rather than just leaving them blank. Again, this is kind of a worst comes to worst situation, but at least you're answering the questions. Maybe you'll get some of them right. Again, we talked about practicing timed writing. Hopefully now you know what works for you, and that you know what works best for you, you can use those in the test. So an example here is when I would take tests, I did not like looking at the clock while I would take a test. I found that very distracting. I found it would make me more anxious. And so I avoided the clock, just focused on my exam, and worried about the clock later. Some people might need to look at the time to be able to pace out their tests accordingly. This is why practice time writing is really important, so that you can find what works best for you. All right, so those are some test taking strategies, and now you're done your test. Hopefully you feel really good, but you're not done. There are some things that you can do after your test to keep on improving and keep on growing. So reflection. It's really important after your test to find some time to make note of your experience. So you can write this down, which might be really helpful if you want to look back on your notes for a future test. Think about what you did really well, what you feel confident in. This could be a studying technique, maybe a test taking strategy that you used, or maybe information that you knew. Also think about what you need to improve on. So were there areas where you feel like you maybe could do better for next time? Make note of this so that when you look back on your reflection, you can include that in your future studying strategies. Also be as specific as possible. So think about specific questions that you know you didn't get right. Can you write those down so that at a future test, when you need to bring up that information again, you can go over it a few times before the actual test? Also, be specific with your test taking strategies. How did you mark up your calendar? How much time did you have? Did you go through the information before the test? It's really important to be specific and to write everything down so that you have this information for you just to improve on next time. And this is how you build a study strategy that works the best for you, is with all your information that you take with you from your previous experience. So if we were brainstorming and we were thinking about things that we could reflect upon, if you do want to write in the chat what you think maybe could be some reflection questions to use, you can do so. But you want to have some guiding questions when you are reflecting upon your experience. So what are some questions that we could think about? Well, you could think about, did I give myself enough time to study? Maybe next time you need more time to study. Or maybe you give yourself plenty of time and you can actually spend that time on other subjects. If you studied the exact same way, how would you do for the next test? All right, so again, looking at that studying strategy. Do your grades reflect your effort? So if you did really well and you studied a lot, maybe your grades do reflect your effort. If you studied really, really hard and you spent a lot of time studying and you don't do so well, maybe you need to change up your studying techniques. Did you feel prepared going into your exam? Did you have enough time during the test? Which questions stumped you? And would you do anything differently next time? These are all really important things to think about when it comes to reflection. All right, and let's say it doesn't go well. This happens and it's okay. And you can reach out for support and change what you do next time so you just keep on getting better and better. So reach out to support. So you can contact your advisor to help you come up with a study plan. You can also contact your advisor to help give you advice on some of the resources that we have on campus that you can use to improve for next time. Also, it's really great if you do want to ask your instructor if you can look over your test. Maybe it was just that you really read over the question quickly and you missed some of those key terms that you would have gotten the answer right if you had noticed. All of this is really important information moving forward. You can also talk to your instructor about possible makeup opportunities and extra credit work as well. Also, we have tutoring on campus. It is a free program for students to use, and that might be a really useful resource if you do feel like you are having a little bit of a tough time studying. And remember, you are not defined by your failures at all. It's a very natural process of being a student, and there's always room to improve as well. So I'll just leave you with this quote. So, success is the sum of small efforts repeated. There are small things that you can do throughout the semester that is going to increase your chance of success. So you can review the material. You can try to think of examples during your class and apply your knowledge. You can maybe start studying a little bit earlier, or maybe you can reach out for tutoring. All of these things are going to help you in your student experience and create more of an opportunity for success. So thank you so much for coming. Good luck on your finals, but you don't even need luck. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you find some of these strategies useful. If you do want to provide some feedback, you can scan the QR code there, and I really appreciate you coming out.